There we go. Good morning. Good to be with you all this morning. We're going to start out with just a couple of quick announcements. First of all, we do have our round 3 of our food drive. As you can see, it is going great. We are giving out food. We're collecting food. We've taken a lot more food from y'all than we've given out so far, and that's the point because we're going to restock our pantry. It's going to be awesome. So this is going to be the week where the group of y'all that have volunteered to be in charge of the pantry are going to be taking the food back. So next week, you probably won't see food on stage, but we do have our third pantry list to kind of round out what's up here. So grab that off the lobby if you don't have it, and that'll show you what food we're still looking for our food pantry so that we can serve those who are in need. Our next upcoming event, so we just had Trunk or Treat. Trunk or Treat was awesome. Thank you guys so much for volunteering and participating and being a part of serving our community and just reminding people what we are about and who we are. The next thing we want to just put on your calendar so that you're aware of, November 12th, so that's coming up soon, is the Riverside Women's Conference. So this is our event we do once a year. I'm sitting here reading the graphic because I've never been to this, so I don't really know. I don't know what y'all do, but the ladies that come back from it enjoy it. They feed one another spiritually, maybe physically. I don't know. There's also meals. There is food there. You can scan the QR code to register, and the QR code's here and in the Riverside Rundown for those of you who get our emails. So register for the event, show up, and the theme is the armor of God, protecting your faith, and so lots to get out of there. So be a part of that, jump in, join in, plug into what we're doing, and man, I've got a lot more things to announce to you over the next coming weeks of who we are, what we're doing, what we're about. Something we haven't talked about in a long time, mainly because COVID just shut all of this down. But Riverside is invested not just in our mission here in Lafayette, but we're invested in our international missions. And so we've got Johan who's gearing up to go back to Zimbabwe so that they can carry food to the starving churches who are in that area so that they can continue to serve and plant and grow churches in Africa and other places around the world. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking to you about our mission efforts because we've got some really cool ways that we want you guys to partner with us and be involved in what God is doing, not just here, but around the world. So for this week, we're going to be in part 8 of our Numbers sermon series, our Book of Numbers sermon series called In the Wilderness, and we're talking about working it out or hammering it out this morning, and we're going to see what that looks like. Let me start with the prayer. We're going to jump into our text. God, you are good and glorious and worthy of our worship this morning. I know this morning as I arrived here, I felt pulled in different directions and I felt scattered. And as I've shaken hands and talked to some of the people here, there is just some of us are just tired or spread thin or scattered this morning. And so God, my prayer this morning is that you will unite all of our hearts to worship you and to see your nature and your character in the Bible as we read it together this morning. Help us to see you so that we can savor you, and it's through savoring you that we worship you and we praise you and we surrender our lives to you. And so we just ask that you will help us knock down these walls of resistance or these walls of fear that we put up that keep us from seeing who you really are in your word. So God, I'm just praying that you will help us glorify and magnify you this morning through your preached word. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we've got about 6 or 7 more sermons in the book of Numbers that I want to go over with you. But I do know that with our church in transition and where God is taking us, I want to, we could spend another year in Numbers. I would love it. I will geek out over weird parts of the Bible with you as long as you guys will let me. But we have a big vision and a big mission to cast as we get ready to jump into the new year. And so what you're going to see over the next 6 or 7 weeks is we're going to start condensing some of these sermons. And so I wanted to make like 3 or 4 sermons out of the chapters we're covering this morning, and we're going to turn it into one. And you're going to see that over the next several weeks is that we're going to finish up this book of Numbers to see how God journeys his people while they're in transition, and then we're going to plan to be done around Christmas so that we can move on, get back into the New Testament and start telling stories about Jesus again, because that's what I really want to shine a light on. So I'm going to cover, we finished chapter 15 last week. We're covering 16, 17, and 18 this week, but we're just barely hitting 17 and 18, okay? So let's jump in. We'll read through the text, and you'll see what we're talking about as we read it together. So starting in chapter 18. The Lord said to Aaron, so chapter 16, God affirms Moses as the leader of his people. Chapter 17, he affirms Aaron as the priest of his people. In chapter 18, he's letting Aaron know what that means for Aaron and his sons and the rest of his family. And so Aaron serving in this high priest role, Aaron is the one that helps God's people atone for their sin and draw near to the presence of God. So in that time period, we're calling that a high priest. In your life today, maybe you've got a pastor or a coach or a teacher or a parent or somebody that is in that role where you have let them be the person that's going to help you atone for your past and draw near into the presence of God. That's the job that Aaron has, and this is how God describes that calling. The Lord said to Aaron, you, your sons, and your family are to bear the responsibility for offenses connected with the sanctuary, and you and your sons alone are to bear the responsibility for the offenses connected with the priesthood. Man, I don't want to lose most of you for the sake of our Bible nerds, but so for you Bible nerds, you have the tribe of Levite, which Aaron is a part of, and all of them are the Levitical priesthood that work in the temple all throughout the Old Testament. And then within them, one branch of their family tree is Aaron and his sons, and not only are they Levitical priests, but they're the high priests that go into that inter-sanctuary to help the Israelites atone for their sins, okay? We're past the geeky part. Let's jump in. Okay, so he's saying this is your calling and this is your responsibility. You are to help them come close to God, and you're to take care of the temple. And so he says, and you and your sons alone are to bear the responsibility. And then you jump down to verse 7. Same chapter, verse 7, he says, but only you and your sons may serve as priests in connection with everything at the altar inside the curtain. I am giving you the service of the priesthood as a gift. So those of you that God has given you something, he says, I'm putting you over this. You're in charge of this. I've got a plan for you. I've got a purpose for you. I've got something for you to do. And so God has called me to lead in the form of preaching and teaching and being a minister. And to me, he says the same thing he says to you that are parents, or to you that are spouses, or to you that you know there are people in your life that God is calling you to speak into their lives and love on and encourage, and everything, whatever God has given you in your life. He goes, I'm giving you this as a gift, but it's also a responsibility. It's a gift, it's a responsibility. So in verse 1, he goes, hey, look, I'm going to make you and your family priests, but being a priest is a big responsibility. And then in verse 7, he goes, this priesthood, remember, I'm giving it to you as a gift. And so what we often do to God, and we often do to the loved ones in our life, is we want the gift, but we don't want the responsibility that comes with the gift. You guys follow me? So all the problems that we're having up to chapter 18 is a result of people jealous of the gift, even though they're not willing to bear the responsibility. And so some of you, you're a parent, and God has gifted you with children, and they're awesome. Children are a gift. They're also a big responsibility. You're working for that promotion, and God moves in your life, and pieces fall together in just the right place, and God just gifts you with the next level up in your life, and you realize as soon as you step into that position, it's not just a gift, it's also a responsibility. And so what we see all throughout this text is God is showing his people who belongs to him and who he's calling to a purpose and to a ministry and to a lifestyle that accords with God. But he's warning us the whole time, when I give you this gift, there's a role for you to play. I've got a part for you. I've got a purpose for you. I've got a person that I'm growing you to become. And so this life that we call the Christian walk, this life of Jesus followers, this life of people that are surrendering their lives to God, there is a gift in the joy, and there is a gift in the peace, and there is a gift in the community, and there's a gift in the blessings, and there's a gift when you just get your money situation right and you start stewarding it God's way instead of your way, and you realize even if you're working with less, you have more than you ever needed, and you look around and you go, God's way is a gift. And then he goes, but with that gift comes great responsibility. What we're going to see when we get to chapter 16 in just a minute, we're walking the text backwards so that we can see this is how God solved the problem. In chapter 16, we see the problem. And what the problem is there are people that are jealous of the role that God has called some of his people to. They want the role, they want the gift, but they don't want to do the work that it takes to get there. And so they go, I want the gift, I don't want the responsibility. Everything in your life, everything that God is giving you comes with both of those. There's blessings, but with those blessings come the work. There's a harvest season, but the harvest season only comes if you work the ground and you plant the seed and you faithfully water and you make yourself responsible to and accountable to the work that God has appointed you to. And so in other words, if you want a good marriage, if you want flourishing children, if you want a stable career or an awesome career or whatever, an exciting career, whatever it is you're after, like whatever you're looking for, God goes, man, I've got blessings in abundance, but are you willing to work for it? Are you ready to go through what I've got to grow you through in order to be willing to step up to the level of responsibility that this gift requires, or prerequisites perhaps? So chapter 18, there's a responsibility, there's a gift to your calling. Chapter 17, the goal of chapter 17 is when they grumble against Aaron, God goes, okay, I'm going to show you, I'm going to quiet down the grumbling, and this is how I'm going to do it. So who is God calling to that responsibility? Who is God calling to that giftedness? And one easy way to see is, man, go where the fruit is. You want to see who is really working on Team Jesus and who the Bible describes as a wolf in sheep's clothing? Look at where the fruit is. See where see what plants are blossoming in the garden that God is planting in your life. You can look at your family, you can look in your work environment, you can look in your church, and what God promises you all the time: bad trees don't bear good fruit. You will recognize a good tree by the fruit that they bear. So in chapter 17, this is what God calls Aaron to do. He says, there's all these people that want your calling, they want your blessing, they want your gifting, but they don't want the responsibility. And all of them think that they deserve it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call all of the leaders of the different tribes. I'm going to get them to bring their staff. So you can imagine the chief of a tribe, the chief of their household, the chief of their lineage, the older leading men of the faith, and they have their staff that signifies, I'm the one that makes decisions on behalf of my family. And God says, I want all of you to bring your staffs into where the presence of God dwells. You're going to bring the staff into the tent of meeting. I'm just realizing how weird and confusing all of this language is for those of you that haven't been in this number series with us. That whole, like the last three sentences, you're like, if you're new here or if you're visiting, you're like, none of that makes sense, okay? So let me see if I can rein this in. So these chieftains, these family leaders have their staff. God says, bring your staff into the tent of meeting, and the one that sprouts. So God's going to do something that is not normal, and he's going to provide a fruit that is not normally there because walking sticks don't normally grow flowers, right? And so he says you're going to bring your staff in to the area, and you're going to write the names on your staff, and on the staff of Levite, you're going to write Aaron's name. On the staff of the other tribes, you're going to write their leader's name, and for there must be one staff for the head of each of the tribe. Place them in the tent of meeting in front of the Ark of the Covenant, where I will meet with you. The staff belonging to the man I choose will sprout, and I will rid myself of this constant grumbling against you by the Israelites. So what he's saying is the way I'm going to shut down the crosstalk, the way I'm going to shut down the rabbling and the grumbling and the complaining and the arrogance and the pride and the ego that causes people to backbite and infight and work against each other amongst my people is I'm going to direct all of your attention to the growth and to the fruit that I have for you. And so in verse 4 and 5, he says, I'm going to choose the one that will sprout. This is going to end the grumbling. And then you jump down to verse 8, and to none of our surprise, we go, oh yeah, it's Aaron. It's the guy that it's the main character of the story, right? We like it when the main character of the story gets affirmed by the narrator. And so God's like, he's my boy, he's the guy I'm calling, he's the guy that is being fruitful in the life, and all of you can stop your grumbling when you see the fruit. And so he says, the next day Moses entered the tent and saw Aaron's staff, which represented the tribe of Levi, and it had not only sprouted, but had budded, blossomed, and produced almonds. Listen, don't go to a church where there's no fruit. Don't connect yourself spiritually and relationally with people that are not bearing fruit in their life. Do not allow yourself to be pastored by people who might know all the right answers and know all the scripture and have all the knowledge and profess to be super spiritual, but they themselves are not blossoming and budding and producing fruit in their life. If there is no fruit, you might not be looking at one of God's sheep. You might be looking at a wolf in sheep's clothing. There were 12 staffs that day. One of them was chosen to lead God's people because they were the one bearing fruit. What that means for us and in your Christian walk and us as a church together, one of the things that I told our elders and our staff at the beginning of the year is I said, this year I want to get better at celebrating our wins. Because I think if we can just show people what God is doing amongst our people, if we can just show people the fruit, if we can just if we can just hold up our staff and go, do you see the blossom? Do you see the fruit? Do you see what is growing at the end of all the work that we're doing here as a church? And look, you can worship where you want. You can get led and pastored by whoever you want. You can submit yourself to the authority of whoever you want, but not all of them are bearing fruit. And so it's like every year I'm going to get myself into trouble. This is not going to sound like the censored version, but this is the censored version. Every year, man, it's like there's these groups of like hyper-religious, super conservative people, and they're not preaching the gospel. They're not shining their light. They're just picking on people and using religion and the Bible as an excuse to pick on people, right? And for whatever reason, this year it was Halloween. We got so much hate this year, and by some of the people who put trunks up last year are some of the people that this year were choosing to hate on us and to be mean to us because we had like a ghost on our trunk or treat advertisement. Which I'd like to point out, if you can see like a little kid's eyes in behind the sheet that they're wearing, that's not a ghost, guys. Like. I was shocked. Like somebody posted on Facebook and they're like, I can't believe you're putting ghosts on your trunk or treat advertising. You guys are a church. And I'm like, that's not a ghost. I don't know what you think ghosts are, but that little kid with a sheet over his head is like, we have a different idea of what evil is and what demonic presence looks like. But look, if you guys are like in between on that, if you don't know where you land on that, here's the solution. Look for the fruit. I don't have permission to tell this story, but I think I can do it vaguely. I'll just tell it. Last night at the trunk or treat, somebody came up to me, and they came and they visited and they brought their family, and it was awesome. And then afterwards, they sent me a text and they said, "Man, it just meant so much for my fiance to come and be a part of that." And what I didn't know, and what none of y'all knew, is that this person this person's fiance, they've got some church hurt. They've got some reasons why they don't want to walk into a church. And you have a lot of friends and family and people in your life that aren't beside you right now, not because of anything you did or anything we did, but because of just something that churches did to pick on and hurt and demean other people. And so this person was like, man, getting to bring my family last night, and so they can just see what y'all are about there. Like, that meant so much to her because we're getting to show her that this is good and not all churches are that way. And so those of you that you're walking into your church experience, you've got a lot of shame and you've got a lot of guilt and you've got a lot of burdens because of how other religions or other churches made you feel. My encouragement to you is, man, just find a church that has enough fruit to show you, man, this is what we're about. This is what our heart is. This is who we care about. These are the kind of people that God loves on, and so these are the kind of people we want to love on. And let me just show you. Can we just put up a few of these pictures up here? We're just going to jump through a few pictures of our trunk or treat. So we had some of our kids in the youth side doing our face painting for us. Let's see, how many of these do we have? Awesome. We had Kedra there with I guess some of her coworkers. Is Kedra here this morning? Where's she's at? Was those coworkers with you? Yeah, awesome. And they had their booth. What else do we have up here? I haven't seen these pictures yet, so I'm looking at them. That's adorable. That's awesome. We can just keep them going. We can walk through. Is that Brave? Is that what that is? Okay, never seen the movie, but I get it. They let the kids shoot a bow and arrow at the target, these little toy bow and arrow, and that's how they would get their candy. Kids the blow-up costumes are so cool. We didn't have those when I was a little kid. Those are awesome. I love that. Kids playing on the playground. There's Danny and Becky dressed up as Tin Man and Dorothy. That's awesome. Hunter in their booth, which was really cool. He brought a snake, so there's that. How much food did we give out? Do we know how much food we gave out yesterday? Anybody get the number? Okay, Johan was in charge of it, and he wasn't. They're at a funeral service this morning, so they're not here. 500 burgers, hot dogs total. Yeah, so that's how much food we gave out. I don't know how many people came, but that's how much food we just gave away to the community. And if you guys don't know what I meant earlier in the year when I said I would rather sell the building and use the money to bless other people and serve our community than take all of your tithes and contributions and just use it to pay the lights, that's not what we're about. That's not how we want to use our money. I was delighted when Johan called me and said, man, food prices have gone up. This is how much we're spending to feed our community for our trunk or treat. And I said, great. Like, ship it, let's buy it, let's go, let's do it, because that is a great way for our church to spend money loving on people and blessing people and showing people, man, we're not asking anything from you. We're not here to take anything from you. We just want to love on you and get back to you. And look, I just want to show people the fruit that's happening in this church. Man, if you guys just knew the week that I had this week. This is one of those weeks where, like, every day was something and every night was something. We were just amongst church people all week long. But it's like everything I went to, I'd sit down, Janae'd say, hey, we've got this Bible study. We'd go to this Bible study, and I'd just see somebody open up and just talk about what it meant to them to be walked through the Bible for the first time and just get to read this and understand it. And you see them taking those faith steps. We're watching people go into the waters of baptism, step into their faith, and just begin that faith journey for the first time. We're watching people that have been far from God step back in, and not only are they stepping back in, but God is blessing them, and there is fruit to be seen and had, and God is just bringing us exactly the kind of people that Riverside loves, because Riverside has always sought to be a healthy place for messy people. And some of you new people, we love you. We know you're messy. We know you got baggage. We know you come here with a lot of guilt and a lot of church hurt and a lot of past mistakes and a lot of things that you don't want to talk to us about because you're afraid that Christians might judge you. And we're the church that goes, man, that's the fruit that we need to see, because it reminds us that we are going the direction that God wants us to go. And you show me a church without fruit, and I'll show you people that were willing to start the journey but not finish the journey. And so I say all of that because as we walk back to chapter 16 is about a group of people rebelling against God, rebelling against God's leaders, because while they were willing to set out on the journey, it was never in their intentions to finish the journey where God wanted them to go. So whatever God's doing with your life, there's a gift and there's a responsibility, and you have to be able to steward both well. The way you know you're on the right path is look for the fruit, that God will show you the budding and the blossoming of those whom he has called you to be around and to be in community with. And so he's doing all of that in chapter 17 and chapter 18 as a solution to all the drama that's going on in chapter 16. I would like to see whoever directed Indiana Jones and whoever directed like The Mummy and like those kind of like adventure movies like Tomb Raider, I would like to see them like just do a live action of this chapter. Because this chapter is wild. It reads like an Indiana Jones film. Like you see the earth opening up and swallowing people and people getting burnt alive. And then people like you see Aaron run down with his fire pan, his censer, his lantern that has like the smoke and the incense, the offering to God. He's running down amongst this plague, and you see like thousands of people just dropping dead, and Aaron runs in with urgency to save these people from the wrath of God by atoning for their sins, because that's what pastors and priests do. And so as he runs into the crowd, the plague stops, and you've got a whole group of people afraid of the wrath of God and a whole group of people that have been consumed by the wrath of God, and you've got Aaron standing in the middle, and the whole thing is just this insane drama of chapter 16, and our job is to figure out why on earth did it go down like that. So we're going to skip a lot. We're going to pick a few pieces out and walk through it, and you'll see why we are starting at 18 and working back. So Korah and some other people became insolent and rose up against Moses. And so with them, 250 people, 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders who had been appointed members of the council. So here's what we know about these guys. One, they're rebelling against God. On the other hand, they are well-known community leaders. These are people that are loved by the Israelites, by God's people. They are appointed members of God's council, and from what we can tell in the text, they're doing everything they can in the text to live holy lives. And so these are good guys. It's right that we look at these guys as good guys, because sometimes they are good guys that will not align themselves with the vision and mission of God, and so God will bring them into your life for a season, but they were never meant to walk the rest of the journey with you. And so what we see here is these are well-known community leaders, good people, a part of God's council, working to be holy men of God. But because of their pride and because of their desire for the gifts without the desire for the responsibility, God removes them from his people. So these well-known community leaders, appointed members of the council, they came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron. I feel like we almost skipped this chapter too, because I feel like we just keep preaching this sermon, right? Like I said a few weeks ago in a sermon, I said it's really hard to rebel against God's leaders without it being rebellion against God. And we're seeing the same theme, the same idea happening again in chapter 16. So you see why chapter 17, why God's like, I'm going to make this staff blossom, and I'm going to do that to quiet the grumbling against me. So after 16, God's going to make it known after 16. He's tired of people grumbling against the direction that God has his people on. He's just tired of the complaints. And so he anoints Aaron. He calls him to both his gifting and responsibility. And in chapter 16, he just wipes out the opposition. So let's take a look. They came as a group to Moses and Aaron. They said, "You've gone too far. The whole community is holy." You ever have people in your life, you're trying to serve God, you're trying to honor God. People want to bring you down to their level. I don't know what makes you so special. I don't know why you think you're different than the rest of us. You know, I'm a Christian too. And it's like, no, you believe Christian things. You don't do Christian things. That's not the same thing, right? I'm seeing some blank faces. Let me say that again. In the Bible, Christians are Christians because of what they do. They surrendered to Jesus. They put their faith in Jesus. They walk in faith. They equip people for the work of ministry, right? Christians are Christians because of who they are and what they do, not merely because of what they believe. Because there's not a lot of difference in the beliefs of demons and angels. They believe the same thing. They do different things, right? And so here's these guys going, you've gone too far. We're all holy too. Like, we're the same, me and you. And they're sitting there thinking, really? Because I get that you're mad that God gifted us with this calling that he didn't gift you with, but that also comes with a responsibility. And it's not what you believe, and it's not what you think, and it's not how many rules you follow. It's, are you willing to go where God tells you to go? Are you willing to step up to the responsibility of your faith and work out your salvation with fear and trembling? Are you willing to do the part that God has called you to do? Are you here to do the responsible part, or are you just here for the free gift? And so he says, you've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourself above the Lord's assembly? Moses, Aaron, I don't want to submit to you. I don't want to be led by you. We're holy too. God works in me. I'm part of God's people, and so I want what you have. And they're sitting there going, man, you can have what I have, but you got to be willing to bear the responsibility. And so why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? And like Moses, the humble man he is, when Moses heard this, he fell face down. He said to Korah and all of his followers, in the morning, the Lord will show you who is holy. In the morning, the Lord will show you who belongs to him and who is holy, and he will have that person come near him. Let me say this. Holiness it literally means set apart. It's being more like God and less like who you were yesterday, today. And so being holy is just being different, the kind of different that God is, right? And so God lives differently than you and I do because we're sinners and he's not. And holiness just means looking more like that and less like the sinner that we would be if God wasn't working in our life. And so they're sitting there going, hey, we're holy. And then he reminds them, man, it's God who chooses you. Right? God chooses you. God picks his vessel. God works in you. And so not only does God choose you, but it's God who makes you holy. You don't make yourself holy. You can't do enough good works to earn the approval of God. You can't work enough deeds of merit to earn your salvation, to earn your blessing, to earn the gift of grace. You can't be holy enough to win the favor of God. And so God never picks his leaders by going, give me the holiest, most qualified, most honorable person. We do not see that in Scripture. And so right here, he's pointing to Moses, and he's going, give me the stuttering murderer. Give me the guy who didn't want this life and didn't ask for this calling and doesn't want to be in this place. And I'm going to take him, I'm going to turn him into a man who's going to lead my people. And in doing so, everyone's going to know that it was God working and not him. Everybody's going to know that he's not here because of his talent. He's here because I picked him and I made him holy. And in the end, God gets the glory and not us. And so the way God keeps man from heaping glory onto ourselves and robbing God of what makes God awesome is he often picks the intentionally messy, seemingly unholy, broken person and goes, that's the person I'm refining. That's the person I'm calling according to my purpose. That's the person I have chosen to step up and receive not just the gift, but also the responsibility of the path that he's walking down. So he says, the man he chooses will cause to come near him. You, Korah, and all your followers are to do this. Take censers. So these are these fire pan lanterns that they would carry with the incense that would smoke. And so they would carry them on a chain. They'd wave them around. The smoke would go up. And so he says, so bring your censers tomorrow and put burning coals and incense in them before the Lord. The man the Lord chooses will be the one who is holy. Oh, I could preach a whole sermon just on that. Let me say it again. God doesn't choose you because you're holy. You're holy because he chose you. Do you see that here? The man the Lord chooses will be the one who is holy. He's not holy. He's a broken, sinful person just like you, right? He's not where he is because he's doing something awesome. He's where he is because God is doing something awesome in his life. God chooses you. He begins a work in you. He promises to perfect that work in you. And by his holiness and his righteousness that he gives to you as a free gift, he makes you holy. Not because you're good, but because he's good. The one whom he chooses, he will make holy. And he says, and then he warns them, you Levites have gone too far. He's warning them, like, look, you've been grumbling, you've been complaining, you've been working against me, you've been trying to stall the mission of God, you've been trying to prolong the journey of God, you've been so afraid of actually stepping into the space that God has promised us that this time, this rebellion is too far. And so we said last time, after what happened last time, for those of you that have been with us, after what happened last time, God is not pulling punches anymore. He's getting ready for his people to move through the wilderness into the promised land, and we are now in the season of blessed subtraction. You guys understand the doctrine of blessed subtraction, that sometimes God prunes you so that you can bear fruit. Sometimes God culls the herd. Sometimes God will remove people from your life because it's not until he removes those people from your life that you take the next step and enter into the next chapter of the book that is your life. And so he's warning them, you've gone too far. And this is what God does in response. Let's keep going. We'll drop down towards the end of the chapter. Let me fill in some of the details. I had a feeling that this week we'd have a few kids in here this morning, so I just skipped all the gory stuff, okay? Go back and read it if you are into this kind of stuff. It's wild, okay? And so basically, they bring all their incense before God. They all come and they direct their attention toward the tent of meeting, and God tells them, he goes, okay, all of my people, I want you to move out of the way because the rest of these guys have rebelled against me for the last time. They no longer get my mercy. Today, they get my judgment. And so God, in his loving, just righteousness, sends his wrath amongst these people, and the earth opens up, swallows up the people. Fire comes out of the earth and consumes the people. And so you've got all the people holding these lanterns get consumed by fire. All the people amongst them that didn't get out of the way, swallowed up by the earth. And you read that and you're like, that is insane. And so you jump down to verse 35. A fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Eleazar, son of Aaron, so this is one of Aaron's priests, his son, tell Eleazar the priest to remove the censers from the charred remains and scatter the coals some distance away, for the censers are holy. So this is what God did. God just removed everything unholy there. God just burned up and consumed all the unrighteousness and all the unholiness, but kept that which belonged to God, that which had been set apart for the Lord. He says, the censers of the men who sinned at the cost of their lives, hammer the censers into sheets to overlay the altar, for they were presented before the Lord and have become holy. I want to make sure we say this the right way. So they're not holy by their own merit. They were given to God. They belong to God now. So these men of God, these supposedly holy men that God goes, it's not your holiness that's a problem. It's not your role in the community that's a problem. Everybody loves you guys. It's your rebellious heart that works against my mission and works against my people that is the problem. And so God removes these people from the Israelites. God allows the earth to swallow up these people, but he says, but by the way, the lanterns they carry, the censers, those they gave to me. They dedicated those to me, and because they brought them to me, they belong to me now. And so since they belong to him, he goes, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go amongst the ashes, and I want you to comb through the remains and find all of that which belongs to God and hammer it down into this bronze plating that's going to overlay the altar, and then it's going to say that let them be a sign to the Israelites. So Eleazar the priest collected the bronze censers brought by those who had been burned to death, and he had them hammered out as an overlay for the altar so that it will be a sign to all of those who are who are amongst them. So here's the point that I want to make. Here's what all of us, what I want you to see here. Has God ever called you to repurpose something that God has put in your life? Has God ever said, take this thing that I've given you, and look, maybe you got it from somebody else. Maybe the people that brought this to you aren't even in your life anymore. Maybe God has removed them from your life. Do you look back at the failed relationships? Do you look back at the failed friendships? Do you look back at the people that came in and they took more than they gave you? And do you have bitterness and resentment towards them? Or are you willing to take what they gave you and use it for what's next? Right now, as a church, this is what we're doing. We're going, man, God has removed some people. They're not journeying with us anymore. They don't want to stay on the journey that God has put us on. But they've contributed. And they brought something to us. They've helped us. They've gotten us this far. And so what God calls us to do, he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go through the ashes of all of those who are no longer with you, and I want you to find what they have contributed to your cause. I want you to hammer it in to something that's useful in the next season. Some of you, God has taken you, like this is your story. God has taken you, and he's going, man, I'm just going to burn away everything unholy about you, but you belong to me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you and I'm going to hammer on you. I'm going to work it out. I'm going to hammer it out to turn you into the thing that is useful in the place that we're going next. The lanterns served their purpose for this season. The lanterns did what they were here to do, but now they're going to be hammered down to be molded into the thing that's going to serve God's purpose in the next season. And so some of you realize God's hammering on you right now. He's working on you. Like you were brought to God. You submitted yourself to God, and God's like, great, you belong to me. You are holy. You are mine now. I have chosen you. I'm not getting rid of you. I'm going to burn off everything that rebels against me, but you, I'm not letting you out of my sight. You are mine. I have made a promise to you. I will be your God. You shall be my people. For those of you that are in our small groups, we're in 1 Peter. Last week we did chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2. You are now a holy people, a chosen race, a people for God's own possession. You are now a royal priesthood. And so for those of you that got here through fire, for those of you who got here through heartache, for those of you who lived a rebellious life and God had to start pulling people out of your life, so often God looks at you and he goes, I'm not letting go of you. You belong to me. But with my gifting comes responsibility. And so here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to work on you. And we're going to have to hammer some things out so that you can take the shape to serve the role that I've called you to serve. And so some of you, you're like, what's my calling? What's my role? What's my purpose? And God's going, it's not being a lantern anymore. It's not being a censer. We're growing you to something else. We're calling you to something else. And if that means we've got to beat on you a little bit to get you to take the shape that God is growing for you, then that's what we're going to do, because the one thing God's not willing to do is let go of those whom belong to him. I heard, I had to go look this up because I heard a guy in an interview. He's the pastor in Atlanta of Story Church, I think is the church he's at. And he was talking about the difference between scaffolding and framing. And I went to look it up and found out he just stole it from T.D. Jakes. And I was like, oh, look, we both steal from the same guy, I guess. Because if I say something that sounds really cool, there's like a 5% chance that T.D. Jakes said it before I did. But here's how he preached it. He said, learn the difference between those who are scaffolding and those who are framing in your life. If those of you who have built a house, I've never built a house. I had to research to figure out what this meant. Those of you that have built a house, God lays the foundation, right? God gives you that foundation, but he calls you to build on it. And as you build on it, what you know is that the scaffolding and the framing go up at the same time. You've got to build the scaffolding so that you can frame out the building, so that you can frame out the house. But here's the thing. The scaffolding doesn't stay. The scaffolding played a role. It contributed, but it was never meant to stay up. And so there always comes a point where you go, hey, thank you for all you've done, but you've got to tear down the scaffolding so that you can move on to the next phase of the project. And here's what we know about our lives and some of your past relationships and some of your past friends and some of the people that used to be a part of your faith community, some of the people you used to church with that you don't church with anymore, is some people God brings into your life to be part of the building that he's making. And so God tells us in Ephesians, he says, you are being built together to become the holy temple that God lives in, and that's the church. The church is a community of people being built together, being joined together. And so it's like framing on a house. We're all being united together, built together to become the place where God dwells. Some people are not going to stay on the journey with you. God gives them to you for a season. And they come into your life, and they help you build great things. They help you frame out what God is building amongst your people, and then they're gone. And we thank them for their contribution. We're honored to have walked with them and to have served with them. But at the end of the day, they weren't part of the foundation. They weren't part of the framing. They were just the scaffolding. And God, we're thankful that they were there. We're thankful that these guys brought the censers. We're thankful that 250 censers were brought and dedicated for the Lord. But we will shamelessly take every one of them and hammer them down into the thing that serves us in the next season that we're going. Thank you for your church. We're going to sell it. We're gonna use the proceeds to serve God, to build faith communities, to spread out and serve our community, plant churches in our city, plant churches in our nation, continue to plant churches in Zimbabwe and in other parts of the globe. We're going to take everything that you guys have helped contribute to what we're building. We're going to remove the scaffolding. We're going to reshape everything we have left into something that works for the rest of the journey that God has us on. Some of you, you don't become who God's growing you to be because you don't want to be hammered. This is something that only works in this part of the Bible. This is not the YouTube clip that we want to post, okay? I'm going to say it, and just know this only works in this context, okay? But in this context, God is less concerned about their holiness and more concerned about them getting hammered, right? So you can say the sermon was about not worrying about being holy, but worrying about being hammered, right? That's what we preached on this morning. In this context, it works. If you take that out of context, that just does. I wanted to call the sermon that. I tried to call the sermon Getting Hammered. And you guys know why I need Janae so much. Cassie laughs. She's like, yes, let's call it that. That's funny. Janae's like, we're not going to call it that. I'm like, you're right. I learned to listen to her when she's being my conscience. She's like, you can't call a sermon Getting Hammered. God grows you towards holiness. Do y'all want the theology lesson? This is called sanctification, okay? Sanctification is the process of God hammering out our imperfections to grow us into who he called us to be in the first place. So we start out as one thing, and God starts shaping us and molding us until we become the thing that serves the purpose that he has for our lives. And so look, some of you, you're like, what's my purpose? What's my calling? And God's answer is, man, I've got a big calling. I've got a big purpose. I've got not just a gift, but also a responsibility. But in order for you to step into that, there's some work we've got to do. There's some reshaping and some remodeling that we have to do on your life. We're going to hammer you down until you take the shape that God has for you to become. And for those of you that have gone through it, for those of you that have been journeying with God, and you're sitting there going, God, you're not taking away my blessing. I will wrestle you until the sun comes up because you promised me that I was yours and I belong to you, so you can work on me and you can hammer me and you can mold me and you can grow me and you can push me out of my comfort zone, but I'm not letting you remove me from the rest of the faith community because I belong to you. You said you would be my God. I'm walking with you, so you can hammer me into whatever shape you want. I'm walking with you. And some of us, we're on a journey. We're like, man, I got asked yesterday, they're like, so you know, after this church transition, like where are we going? What exactly does it look like? I was like, I don't know. I don't have to know. I know what the what is. I don't know the how yet. None of us know the how yet, and that's okay. Our job is just to become whatever God is turning us into. That's our job. Our job is to go, when God says you're not a censer anymore, you're going to be bronze plating, we go, I guess I'm plating now. And I know that that's going to be a long process of becoming what God is turning me into. I know that there's a lot of pounds of the hammer that I'm going to have to take to turn into who God is growing me to be, but I'm not walking away from him. I'm not letting the world swallow me up. I'm going wherever God's going. I move where the cloud moves, and so if God has to beat on me a little bit so that I can step into the next chapter, then bring it on, because I belong to him. Our Bible class in just a little bit is Philippians chapter 2. In order to get what we're teaching Bible class on this morning, I want you to see the verses that come right before it, and I want you to see how it fits what we're preaching in. So in Philippians 2, verses 12 and 13, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence. So he says, in your obedience. So God has a plan for you, and you have to submit yourself to that plan. So God and you are partnered together to make the most out of your life that you have. And so as you have obeyed, not only in my presence, but much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. If you haven't heard it in a while, it sounds cheesy if you say it too much, but man, it's so important we keep reminding our Christian brothers and sisters this. God is working to fulfill his good purpose in your life. You read some of this stuff in the Old Testament. If you don't understand it, the world tries to convince you that God is against you and that you need to be afraid of God and that God's trying to get you. And if you step out of line, then God's going to punish you. And what Scripture reminds us over and over is God is for you. God is for you. God is working out your life for his will, according to his will, to fulfill his good purpose in your life. God has a good purpose for your life. God has a good purpose for your life. My claim, what my ministry is convincing you that purpose is better than your purpose. And the happiest, most joyous Christians I know are the Christians that have surrendered to God, that go, I have my way and you've got your way, and every time those are different, I choose your way over my way because I believe your purpose is better for my life than my purpose for my life. And so he says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, and we go, well, God, I thought I couldn't earn it. I thought I couldn't do enough good works. He goes, no, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is working in you. So not only is God for you, but God partners with you. God sets you on a journey, and so God's going, I'm going to do this part. I'm going to work it out with you. So God partners with us. God is for us, and God is also in us. Take a look. Continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act. So God's going, I'm going to change your heart. I'm going to change what you will. I'm going to change what you desire. I'm also working in you to change how you do it. I'm changing how you act and how you function as a person in this world. Your job is to hammer all of that out. And so he's going, work out your salvation. Well, God, how can I do that? I'm weak and I'm a sinner and I don't know all the right answers. I'm not very strong as a person. Because I'm working in you. Because I am also at work with you. You and I are partnered together, working on your life as a team. You're working out your salvation. I'm working in you and for you to change your heart and to change your actions. And us working together fulfills the good purpose that God has for our life. And so God is gifting you, and God is for you, and God is working in your life. But there is a part for you to play. You've got to let God hammer some stuff out. You've got to be willing to dig through the ashes and go, man, what can I take from this? What can I learn from this? This season I've been in, this bad beat that I've endured, what am I supposed to grab from this that God is going to hammer out so that we can step in to the next chapter of my life? Let's finish this out. One more thing I want you to see, and we're going to close it down. Most of you know, if you're visiting with us, don't let that be confusing. When I say one more thing, I mean one more entire point, right? I made that mistake too many times. I'm like, in my last point, and people think, oh, like in 30 seconds we're going to be singing. No, one more point. So this is the third point. So one more third of this sermon, all right? Bear with me. The next day, thank you, Wardell. This next day, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And this is their claim. You have killed the Lord's people, they said. Very often, God does something and we blame God's people. God moves in somebody's life, and we blame the leaders, we blame the elders, we like to blame people for what happened, because everybody wants to think that they're on God's side, right? And so in this moment, here's all these holy people, here's all these super holy, good people that can't imagine that God would call Moses and Aaron to a position that they haven't been called to, because in their eyes, God's on their side, and they're the good ones. So they can't see. So God swallows up 250 false prophets, rebellious people against God. God swallows them up, and they look at Moses and Aaron and go, we blame you. You must be at fault for that. You killed God's people. And remember, Moses fell face down, man. Moses and Aaron are sitting there working on God. They love God's people. They don't want to see the wrath of God against the people that they have been journeying with. They are on their side. And so look, just be warned, like the most dangerous people in the world are the people that are working against God, but claim to have God on their side. When you're convinced that God is on your side, anybody that opposes you is now an enemy of God in your eyes. And so here's these people. They're working against God, but they're so convinced that they're godly that when God starts proving to them that they are not sitting as comfortably with God as they think they are, they see all of this happen, and they go, oh, it must be Moses and Aaron's fault. Listen, if you're a Christian and you're living your life and you're glorifying God and you're bearing fruit, you're going to have haters. There will be people that blame you for what God's doing in their life. He says, you have killed the Lord's people, they said. But when the assembly gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron and turned toward the tent of meeting, suddenly the cloud covered it and the glory of the Lord appeared. This gets dark. Y'all check this out. Then Moses and Aaron went to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord said to Moses, get away from this assembly so that I can put an end to them at once. The wrath of God does not abide sin. The wrath of God does not does not excuse and permit evil in the world. God does not have fellowship with evil, sinful people. The reason you need Jesus in your life is because you're a sinner, and until you have Jesus standing in the gap, the only future you have is the wrath of God. And you go, but why is God so mean? He's not mean. He's just. You're the sinner. You're the mean one. We're the broken ones. We are the messed up ones. And God goes, man, I have no fellowship with that. There is evil in you. And some of that evil, man, you refuse to let me hammer it out. And there comes a point when you keep rebelling against God that God goes, now you've refused my grace, you get my justice. And God sends his wrathful justice, and it takes people willing to stand up and say, I'm not gonna allow it anymore. The wrath of God isn't touching my family. I'm going to stand in the way. The wrath of God isn't going to hit my church and prune my church and pull people away from my church anymore. I know they deserve it, but if I can stand in the way, if I can atone, if I can make a difference, if I can shine a light, if I can be the boundary in between the wrath of God against a sinful people, if I can make any difference, then that is the calling that God places on us. And here's what it looks like. He says, get away from the assembly. I'm going to put an end to them. And they fell face down. And Moses looks at Aaron and he says, here's what you're going to do. Take your censer, put incense in it, along with the burning coals from the altar, and hurry to the assembly. And so God's going, I'm about to give all of these people my wrath. Get out of the way. And Aaron goes, I'm not getting out of the way. These are my people. I'm gonna go right into the chaos and right into the wrath and right into the problem. I'm gonna do everything I can to be the difference that offers them the grace that God offered me. And so he runs to them. He's got this lantern. You can imagine it's dark and people are falling out. It looks like a scene out of a zombie movie. And here's Aaron with his fire pan on a chain running into the assembly of people. It says, hurry to the assembly and make atonement for them. Wrath has come out from the Lord. The plague has started. And so Aaron did as Moses said. He runs into the midst of them. The plague had already started among the people, but Aaron offered the incense and made atonement for them. He stood between the living and the dead, and the plague stopped. But 14,700 people died from the plague in addition to those who had died because of Korah. 14,700 plus another 250. You're 50 people shy of 15,000 people that perished that day because of their sin, and it would have been more. It would have been so many. It could have been all of them. Because that's what sin does, right? Sin spreads, man. Sin just keeps infiltrating and infiltrating and infiltrating until it's taken your leaders and it's taken your pastors and it's taken your kids and it's drug everyone down until the only thing God has left to give them is the just and loving wrath of God. And sometimes you have people stand up and go, not my church, not my family, not my kids. I'm going to be the one that stands in the way and make sure that the sin of the world does not infiltrate my church and my people ever again. He stands between the living and the dead, and the plague stops. Some of you want to know what your calling is? That's your calling. Because look, what the holiest people are going to do is they're going to run towards God in that moment. Holy people are going to do that. Right? People that have never struggled for much. People that, man, maybe you didn't have to be hammered that much. You were raised in the church and you're holy and you're good and you're gifted and you're moving for God. And so when God says get out of the way, you get out of the way. But God also calls the people who goes, no, man, I run to the mess. I run into the situation, because the truth is I'm not that holy. I've faced the wrath of God before. I have suffered for my sins, and I don't want that for anybody else. So if there's a way that I can stand between the living and the dead and make a difference, I'm not running from the mess. I'm running to the mess. I'm shining a light into the mess. I'm praising God, offering up a fragrant aroma, incense in the midst of the mess, so that I can be the boundary wall between the sinful death of sin and decay and the living people of God. He finishes it this way. Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance to the tent of meeting, for the plague had stopped. We see this call. God sometimes calls. You're the one that's got to stand in. You've got to stand between. You've got to be the dividing wall. Sometimes God says you're the one that's got to stand in the gap. It's a phrase I've heard a lot. When COVID happened, when our elders stepped down, several of you came up to me and said, hey, I'm here for you. I'm helping you out. I'm here for whatever you need. I'm going to stand in the gap right now. I'm going to do everything I can to be the person that stands in so that we can stay safe from everything that's going to tempt and try to hurt our people right now. We see similar language in Ezekiel chapter 22. Check it out. Ezekiel chapter 22. The people of the land practice extortion and commit robbery. They oppress the poor and needy and mistreat the foreigner, denying them justice. I looked for someone among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land so that I would not have to destroy it, but I found no one. So I will pour out my wrath on them and consume them with my fiery anger, bringing down on their own heads all they have done, declares the sovereign Lord. Without people willing to stand in the gap, without people willing to be light shiners. You guys understand the concept of standing in the gap. At this time period, they would have these fortresses, these castles, and if you were trying to take a castle, if you were trying to build up a wall so that you could climb this wall or knock down the wall or something like that, when the wall started to fall, it takes strong people willing to stand in the gap and make sure the wall might have fallen, but nobody's getting through me as long as I'm left standing. Guys, some of you, we're in a place in our church where some of you guys, you're going to have to stand in the gap. Because there is an onslaught of sinful temptation and inclination in the world today. The world is trying to drag us down. The world is trying to infiltrate the church. The world is trying to take us off of our mission. The world is trying to make sure that we never get the grace of God, and all that's left for us is the consuming, angry fire of God giving us justice because we rejected His grace. And God says, some of you have to stand in the gap. Some of you have to make sure that that doesn't happen. Last week, I preached a sermon about generations to generations and our job to pass the baton to the next generation. If you're one of those people, you're like, I'm going to pass the baton. Welcome to the gap. You're standing in the gap. You're the one who goes, okay, we saw how church was done before. We saw how God is hammering us into the next season. Some of us are going to have to be the ones that stand here and get beat up and face the onslaught of everybody that's working against God so that we still have something to hand the next generation. God needs people willing to stand in the gap. And here's my close. The reason why is because that's what Jesus did for you. Jesus stood in the gap. Jesus made the difference. Jesus stood there to say, I'm going to present to them something holy and blameless before the Lord, and it was everything that he did and nothing that we did. So if we can take just one more look at Ezekiel 16. We just read the verse. I want you to see it again. Hammer the censers into sheets of overlay, a bronze overlay, for they were presented before the Lord and have become holy. And so let them be a sign to the Israelites. And what I want to leave you with this morning is if you're a Christian today, it is because you have been presented before the Lord holy and blameless in his sight. God promises us this. He says, because of Jesus, you have been reconciled, that he has been reconciled to you by Christ's body through death to present you what, church? To present you holy in the sight, without blemish. So he's going to present you holy and blameless to God, free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you have heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and which I, Paul, have become a servant. And what is that gospel? That Jesus Christ, if you give your life to him, if you allow him to hammer out your imperfections, on that last day will hold you up as holy and blameless before the Lord. Jesus is willing to stand in the gap. Jesus is willing to be that boundary line between life and death. Jesus is willing to, through his Holy Spirit, through his process of sanctification, Jesus is willing to work on you and grow you and encourage you to be the person that walks in the next season of your life to a life of peace and grace and blessing and flourishing. And it comes with a great responsibility, and we all fail and we all mess up, but the overwhelming promise of the Bible is that if you stay faithful and if you plug in and if you allow God to continue to work on you, that at the end of your days he will hold you up to God and go, I know he's gone through the fire and I know he's suffered and I know he's not perfect, but because of the work that I've done, he is holy and blameless in your sight. And all of us get to go, I belong to him. I'm entering the promised land. I'm going where he takes me. I'm getting my blessings. I'm stepping up to my calling. I'm going to be the person that God is growing me to be, not because of what I did, but because Jesus stood in the gap. Because Jesus said, he's holy, because Jesus reconciled me to God, because Jesus presented me blameless to him. Jesus forgave my sin with his blood, appeased the wrath of God, and you and I are left with just the grace. So let's close with this, guys. Whatever chapter God is opening for your life, and if you're journeying with us, you know part of what that is. God's transitioning our church. God's growing us as a people. He's uniting us together. He's equipping us to do big, awesome things for him. But in order to get there, there's some work that has to be done. There's some hammering that God has to do in our life. But the promise is, if we let him, if we work on this, God is working in us so that he can reconcile us to God, so that he can present us to God as holy and blameless. You can't get there on your own, but you can give it to Jesus. You can let Jesus refine you. You can let Jesus mold you. You can let Jesus grow you to the person that he's growing you to be. All you have to do is trust his way. Don't rebel against him. Don't be like the sons of Korah. Don't be that person. Go God's way. Let God build you up into the people that he's growing you to be. And it starts by submitting your life to him and letting God be the sacrifice for your sins. And I guess you guys know this part, but look, if you're here this morning and you're not a Christian and you're not doing it God's way, we want to invite you to let God be who stands in the gap in your life. You can learn more about that right now. You can come forward as we stand and as we worship him this morning. Let's sing.
As the mountain.
Hi guys, I'm Johan Adendorf and I oversee all the mission efforts here at Riverside. We are so glad that you watched this message. If it has blessed you, please consider supporting this ministry. Your gifts enable us to make the gospel known all over the world. You can contribute to our mission by visiting riversidechurchofchrist.org/give.